Hello and happy Thursday. Welcome, everybody. I'm Bob Krell. I'm the founder and publisher of Healthy Indoors Magazine, and I'm the host of the show. So happy that you're here joining us again on this great afternoon. Well, actually, some of you it's afternoon, some of it's morning, depending on where you are. But we have a great show today. I'm super excited about our guest today and the topic. Something it's been near and dear to me. We're going to be discussing some of the aspects of healthy buildings versus green buildings and how they interplay. And I think that's just super important and really timely. So today's guest is actually just really has a wealth of knowledge, and he's Andrew Pace. He is the Healthy Home concierge and founder of the Green Design Center. It's a leading resource for homeowners and contractors looking to source products that are healthy and green, to receive expert consulting advice on designing and building healthy green homes. Andrew is also the host of the weekly Non-Toxic Environments podcast. He shows up everywhere. Their website is thegreendesignCenter.com, and we'll talk more about that later. But without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Andy. How are you?
I'm well, Bob. How are you today?
Great, great. And it's like we had an interesting pre-show conversation, and I'm pretty excited to get into this. But I mean, my first question I've got to throw at you is the term healthy home concierge. I know other interviews they've jumped in that. I jumped in that right away.
Sure.
That was actually the first thing that triggered me when I saw that in your promotional material. I was like, what is that?
Yeah, I think it's again, it's a conversation starter, but when when you call yourself an expert in anything, that's some pretty big shoes to fill. And so I would call myself a paint expert, a flooring material expert, a building material expert. And when I started working with a PR publicist, she's like, I like the word concierge because it looks like you're guiding people to the right direction. You're guiding people to the right materials, and that name has sort of stuck over the last year or two now.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, and I've never heard that one before. So that's obviously something you coined.
Well,
Um,
I think maybe others been using it, but that's fine. I think there needs to be more of me out there. That's for sure.
there you go. It's like we need to replicate ourselves because
Mhm.
as we discussed in the pre-show, there's still a disconnect, right? There's a
Yes.
big disconnect in this industry. It's 2022, and I swear, I've been in the IQ industry since the mid 80s.
Mhm.
And we have not progressed as much as we needed to. And the construction industry, certainly, especially in the residential home construction industry,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, there's been progress, certainly innovations,
Right.
but we're not where we need to be, are we?
I don't think so. I do a lot of work with clients in Europe, in Australia, New Zealand, and of course, most of my work is here in North America. The building practices used around the world, you always hear from somebody saying, "Oh, they do things so much better in Europe." Well, yes and no. They do things differently because that's what they have access to there. They have access to a lot of stone and a lot of concrete and so forth. Here, everything's wood. I think that we can maybe utilize the best that we have knowledge wise and merge this together and actually build homes that are not only energy efficient and sustainable, that can last several hundred years, but are actually healthy to live in, or at least not unhealthy to live in. It should be, neutral. The oldest structure in the United States dates back to about the 1600s, you can't walk in it because it's too dangerous to walk in. Last time I was in Italy, I stayed in a villa that was built in the 1400s and it's still an operating hotel. So, yes, there are things we can do to improve, but I think that the industry is finally starting to get what customers are asking about, and not across the board, but I believe that uh, there are signs that there will be drastic improvements in the next few years.
I mean, there's a question about resilience, and clearly in other parts of the world, especially in Europe, right? The structures have been there for literally thousands of years,
Mhm.
and still standing. And I doubt that there's many structures in the United States that will, like you mentioned, one that's from the 1600s, but
Yeah,
there aren't many that really are much more than 100, years old that are
correct.
operational. There's some maybe,
That's
but
correct. Well, I'm a big believer in insulated concrete form construction for a reason, because if you look at, the Colosseum in Rome was built 2,000 years ago out of concrete, and it's still standing today. Um, Wood structures just don't last as long. Now, this may change in the now that we are working on mass timber buildings that use better production methods and better drying methods and so forth. But I still think that the future of construction in the country is going with a more uh, uh, substantial type of building material like concrete block.
It makes total sense. In the pre-show, we discussed, the terminologies, like healthy versus green.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think maybe some people see them as synonymous, but they're clearly not. I mean, these are two separate terms because green means a little bit more than just green. And the term green has been overused and milked, and greenwashed to death. But
Right.
but I mean, you're talking in terms of building the performance of the building, right? Is high
Correct.
performing building is a green building,
Well,
apparently,
that's right.
sort of.
Back when I got started in the business, which is 1992, the word green was just a color. Now it seems to be a way of life. But again, as the terminology sort of evolved, green became this blanket blanket phrase or word for energy efficient, global, environmentally correct, sustainable building or material. In that description, the term human health or human friendly really got completely lost. And with the creation of the LEED program by USGBC, with the creation of Green Globes and the NAHB program and all these different programs that are out there to help determine what is a green structure, again, human health was kind of forgotten about. And the reason for that is that there's no metric to measure what is healthy, because what is healthy to one person may not be healthy to the next. And so it's very difficult to market something that really has no marketability in that regard. You can't
Mhm.
say we just built a healthy home, because somebody will say, based on
Def-
what?
yeah, exactly right.
Well,
What are the parameters that
yeah.
establish that it's a healthy home?
Right. And for me, I would say, well, based on the fact that my customers are living there and not having any health issues, that to me is a healthy home.
Yeah, but see, but the problem is that's somewhat subjective,
It is.
and it's hard to replicate, right? And,
Mhm.
and that's another interesting point because you have a whole philosophy on that. Like you're not necessarily what's healthy for one is not necessarily healthy for another, correct?
That's correct.
And you approach it a little different.
I do. I do. I think that I certainly look at certain things that make sense. We want to keep our overall amount of VOCs down in a structure, right? Because we all understand that some VOCs are hazardous to humans. But the key phrase there is some, not all. You peel the skin off of an orange, you're now releasing 850 grams per liter of VOCs. It's not going to hurt us, but yet the industry looks at all VOCs the same. All VOCs are bad in the eyes of the industry. And so if
Okay.
we chase that number, if we reduce that number, all we're doing is giving an allowance to the industry to use chemicals that are not deemed VOCs.
And you're talking they're using TVOC as a parameter, the total volatile organic
That's right.
compounds. Yeah. Okay.
That's right. And so out of the 92,000 chemicals that are used in building materials and home goods, how many of them are actually VOCs?
I don't know that answer.
Like 287.
Okay.
Um, if you go to the EPA's website, you can download a list of dozens and dozens of carbon-based molecules that are readily vaporized at room temperature that don't actually have a reaction to nitrogen and UV and create smog. Therefore, they're deemed as unregulated VOCs. So we allow those to be used in materials, and then anything else that's not a VOC, there is no regulation for beyond the common like red lists that you see in a lot of the specifications. You can't use anything in the red list. But there's so many other chemicals that are used that we have absolutely no idea what the uh, health effects are in humans. But we focus on these very small lists of VOCs and red list chemicals and give complete approval to everything else, and we don't have to be told what they are.
Well, there's another point there too. Is the synergistic effect among these chemicals? Because we also the way we look at everything, right, from the OSHA, permissible exposure limits, and the ACGI TLVs, they're all based on individual constituents. They're
Right.
not. You don't. They don't have that. And it's really hard. I would say to probably come up with a profile by we have a little of this and a little of this and a little of this, which is what we
Right.
have.
Mhm.
You
It's
know.
impossible.
Yeah.
Think of the medical industry. When you're going to your doctor, they'll say, "All right, what medications are you taking?" They wanna make sure that you're not having any interaction between your prescriptions, even your
Right.
vitamins and off-the-shelf items. In a building, I've seen estimates anywhere from 5,000 to 15,000 different chemicals in the air just from the construction processes, and
Hmm.
it's not just from the building materials themselves, but it's from the interaction between
Hmm.
what's already been released and now how does it react in the air and create
Right.
new chemical compounds.
And that's happening constantly. That's one of my concerns as an IQ guy is that you have certain professed air cleaning technologies or air purifying
Mhm.
technologies,
Right.
that use whatever hydroxyls, any number of different things,
Sure.
the du jour. And they always come out with something to the effect of you come out with like mountain clean air at the end of it, and it's like, no, you don't. That's not the way chemistry works. When you break things down, you get new compounds. It's like, come on, it's not
Yeah,
accurate.
well, again, with everything, we need to look at it as anything in moderation, and, at the end of the day, ventilation is key.
Yeah, no question about it. So we have a couple of questions already, and I
Oh.
actually want to show them because they're germane to what we're talking about now. Is it really that simple? This green versus healthy. Health has always been associated with the medical community, and they don't know anything about indoors. Green is a pretty safe word.
Mhm.
Thoughts on that one?
Well, I like the question because again, associate in the medical community, but think of the fact that every manufacturer of um, paint, for instance, has been marketing green friendly, green safe, eco friendly, but yet just about every major manufacturer of paint in the last 10 years has either been enjoined in a class action lawsuit or fined by the FTC for duping the public about what a VOC actually is.
Hmm.
And so it is really that simple. I mean, the description is simple. Green is not necessarily healthy to humans. Healthy to humans is by definition green. It's environmentally friendly. I like to break it down to this. What good is saving the environment if we're still poisoning all the occupants? And
Well, yeah,
so
that's the whole reason we have indoor environments to begin with, to
Mhm,
get us from the outdoors and put us in what would be considered safer and more palatable environments. We're trying to
mhm.
create that.
Well, and we spend 90% of our lives indoors, and that's only gotten greater in the last couple of years because of the pandemic. And so now we're really forced into being in this a enclosed area, and we have to decide, is it actually healthier inside of the home or outside of the home?
Yeah, that's a good point. We have a. This is more of a comment than a question, but I want to put it up there anyway. Thanking you, Andy, for helping her understand the difference between green and healthy, and helping her stay as healthy as possible. I
That's
paraphrase it.
nice.
It's one of your clients, I take it.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I'm working with her right now. We are building a really nice new home in a new, like, what's called a pocket subdivision. It's the first home in this entire subdivision that's being built to a healthier standard. And it's been a learning curve for the entire construction team, but they've faced it and they really embraced it. And I think that, and the home is almost done. Everybody's learned a lot, and most important, the client is going to be living in a healthier space. This is going to be the home that she retires in.
We in pre-show we talked a little bit about the terminology of human friendly versus eco friendly, and
Yeah,
that's another not so subtle point, but it's an important point, right?
sure.
Making the distinction between the two. So
Yeah,
so give me your
I look at
definitions
that.
on that.
Yeah, I look at that as almost like, back in the day, we use this term greenwashing, right? This is when a manufacturer or a service provider would use words and phrases to sort of oversell how environmentally friendly their product or service is. Eco-friendly versus healthy. If you look at something like, we mentioned this in the pre-show, compact fluorescent light bulbs. When those came out and we were forced to use those over incandescents, it was so we would reduce the amount of energy use in our
And
in
it
our
was
homes.
substantial. You saved 75%
Oh
ish.
yeah,
So, yeah.
sure, you save quite a bit.
Hmm.
Now, what happens if you drop that compact fluorescent on a carpeted floor? Well, State of Maine did an enormous amount of research on this and found that you'll never get the mercury out of that carpeting. Never. Meaning, to save a few cents in energy, we've now spent $2,000 in new carpet. It just, those are the unintended consequence of trying to do the right thing. This happens a lot in the eco versus healthy world. We give up health issues, we give up our health benefits in order to be more eco-friendly. And what I'm trying to teach my clients is to take that back. Let's do things that are human friendly first, because at the end of the day, that's really all that matters. Is if we're gone, the environment will still exist, right?
Yeah.
Um, Earth is not going anywhere, at least for a few more million
Yeah,
years.
yeah, or for a few more billion, probably. Yeah,
Yeah,
the planet always survives, or to
exactly.
a certain point. I mean, it's like
Right.
for quite a few millennia.
But
And
if we're poisoning ourselves off, what good is this?
well, I mean, yeah, and the problem is there's already been 6 episodes where, more than 75% of the life was eradicated on this planet. I mean, people don't think about stuff like that. This story's happened before. Things have
Mhm.
killed themselves off, or
Oh
but
yeah,
but we're unique, I think, is we're the first species that are actually doing it to ourselves. Most of the other ones
that's
were from
true.
external forces that caused it.
Yeah, yeah. The giant meteor heading towards the Earth is basically caused by us
Yeah,
and
we're
and
it.
our desire to build cheaper, faster, and have everything we want at arm's length.
So I mean, I mean, the example you just gave, with the CFL bulb, crashing on a
Mhm,
carpet. I think it's important, to me anyway. One of the points I would think about is that yes, a $2,000 replacement and cleanup of that.
mhm.
That's what it would probably cost to clean that up, replace all the carpet. But the reality is, the average consumer doesn't know that.
Oh
They
no,
don't. They're not. They don't even realize there's a mercury hazard created by that CFL shattering in their
not at
home.
all. And again, it's the industry not either admitting to this at the beginning because they're trying to sell something that is really not great. You know, so I'll give the example of the paint industry because I know this industry probably the best out of all the things that I work on. When zero VOC paints first came out in the mid 90s or the early to mid 90s, nobody liked them, right? The painting contractors hated them because they had horrible coverage. They were like water. They didn't go on very well. They made a mess. Uh, Manufacturers of paint were literally making tens of thousands, if not more, gallons of product to never be sold, actually sit in the warehouse so that they were allowed to continue to manufacture and sell the high VOC items that they make. VOCs are regulated at the manufacturer level, very much like the CAFE standards for automobiles.
Mhm.
So overall, they have to have this average that's lower every year. So back then, nobody would buy these paints because they just didn't perform well.
Mhm.
And at some point, somebody in the paint industry decided if we could only market these to play upon people's emotions, we're gonna instead of calling them zero VOC because 99.9% of the general public has no idea what a VOC actually is
Right.
and why it may or may not be dangerous.
Mhm.
But they started marketing as eco-friendly, air safe, um, green, all these buzzwords that
Yeah,
actually
but these
don't
these
have
are
any merit to
yeah,
them.
I mean, these are words these are fluff. These words
Right,
don't mean anything.
exactly.
No meaning.
And so, and then they realized, you know what? It worked. People were being somewhat duped or marketed into buying these eco-friendly materials thinking they're getting something that's actually healthy for them, and
Mhm.
it's not. I would argue that some of the old-fashioned oil-based, linseed oil-based paints are probably healthier than some of the newer zero VOC paints.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, think about it, but that's been a Madison Avenue tactic since day one.
It
Like the
has
term virtually. I love virtual.
virtually, yeah,
This is
right,
virtually VOC free.
yeah,
Which means it's like being VOC free, but not really. you know,
right, yeah,
you know,
right.
and again, you make a good point there. The VOC that shouldn't be the only parameter. It's like you have
It
to look
it
at the whole
shouldn't be,
thing.
but
Yeah.
for many years, that was a sticking point. The fact that it was a zero VOC paint,
Hmm.
nobody really understood that until somebody said, "Let's market it as being eco-friendly and healthy." Okay, healthy to who? Healthy to what? Right? Years ago, there was a newsletter called Environmental Building News. A fellow by the name of Alex Wilson wrote this, and I remember an article from the '90s that he published that said that he tested some of the early zero VOC paints and actually found that they released high levels of formaldehyde.
Great.
Well, how is that? Formaldehyde was taken out of paints in the late '70s. Well, manufacturers realized that if you add in these 10 to 15 different chemicals in the can, you can't detect it. But when you put it on the wall and it starts to cure, it creates formaldehyde during the curing process.
It's just part of the chemical interactions.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, just like, you think about it, lead-based paints, which are still used in industry, right? The bridges are
Yep.
still painted with them in the maritime industries,
Yes.
everywhere because they're very durable. But,
Hmm.
the lead was also a key antimicrobial component.
Oh, yeah.
And it really works so that, it's funny, you walk into a building with lead, it still has lead paint that's exposed. You usually don't have mold growth on it, even a building that's all moldy, because the lead
Exactly.
paint was a pretty good retardant. So there's always like for every action there is sometimes an undesired reaction, like
Exactly.
you take something out and you end up with something worse.
Well,
uh,
and that happened again with the paint industry with the zero VOC formulations. People don't realize that VOCs, these carbon-based molecules in paint, actually do some really good things too, like make the paint easier to apply, cover better, better flow rate, more longevity,
mhm.
better color retention, all these things. And it's taken a good 15 years for the paint industry to invent new additives to give a similar performance to what they had way back when.
Well, that's been the same is true with floor finishes too, right? Not
Mm.
just paints, right?
Oh, yeah,
The coatings you put on your hardwood floors,
for sure.
typically were oil based, or they were, pretty strong off gassing to the point where when you had hardwood floors refinished, you couldn't really be in the house for a day or two. It was so bad.
Exactly.
And now they've, and there's the same problem. The formulations that didn't have that off gassing had a tendency not to be durable.
Right,
But
right.
that's not really true anymore.
No, it's come a long way, that's for sure. Nowadays, if you find a floor finisher that doesn't use a water-based product as one of their standard, options, I would think they're very few and far between now.
Well, I'd even argue if you don't find a floor finisher that understands that they should set up some containments when they're sanding inside of a house that's occupied in other areas and uses
Sure.
HEPA filtration and actual indoor environmental engineering controls as part of their
Mhm.
protocol, instead of dusting the entire house with fine wood dust and
Oh, yeah.
poly finish. That's another argument.
Yeah,
We, we
run,
have
don't walk away.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So we have well, actually, our editor Susan Valenti threw this up there, so I want to put this out. Are you just a one man movement, or what other groups are you working with to push your message forward? Because your message is a
Well,
really important message.
I think that there are more than just myself out there, but one of the organizations that I was on the board of directors of a while back was the Building Biology Institute, and I would say out of all of the trade associations that are out there, that's probably the one group that really understands the difference between green and healthy. They're the ones who are essentially creating the framework on how to build and remodel to eliminate EMR in the home, how to eliminate Wi-Fi microwaves throughout the home. They really understand, again, the difference between just building a green home that's energy efficient and a healthy home, something that people can live and thrive in.
And EMR, electromagnetic radiation, right? I mean,
Correct.
I'm just For some people, this is one of the problems that all of us in the industry tend to do is we're
Yep,
inundated with acronyms and we tend to throw them around.
I know.
I,
I
I,
I,
I
I
I know
hate
I'm
it, and I
guilty
do
of
it
it too.
myself.
I'm totally guilty of it. I'm totally guilty of it. So here's another question from one of our viewers. Jackie R writes, "Do you see a role for public health departments in informing the public on how to have healthier homes or healthy homes?"
I really
That's a
do.
good question.
I believe that this is a missed opportunity so far for public health departments, and I'll say this because back in 2018, I did a series of presentations at the Lead and Healthy Homes conferences around the world, around the country. And so I was driving from location to location doing these presentations, and in my audience would be all of these public health officials, and they're there to learn about lead remediation and asbestos and sometimes mold. I started talking about chemical off gassing. I even brought a piece of equipment in that we have exclusive access to. It's called a FRAT system, a formaldehyde release attenuation test. And I brought this test there, and I actually took things like paint and nail polish and flooring, and I performed tests during my presentation. And before the presentation was over, I'd give you the results of how much formaldehyde are in these common everyday things that are found in a lot of these, a lot of the public housing and low income housing and so forth. And their jaws would drop. But then they'd say, but what do we do? How do we move forward? It's almost like too much information for them. So I think there is a way that we could get to creating some type of a checklist. I hate to use that because that we've been put in problems with checklists before, but at least to say that people who are living in low income housing and HUD housing and habitat homes generally don't have access to the best health care in the world either.
Sure, sure.
And so
They're underserved
they
population.
have
Yeah.
immune systems that are probably far more compromised than just the average person.
Hmm.
But yet, we're going to, again, the unintended consequence of trying to do the right thing. Let's put them in housing it's full of toxic off gassing. And so I pointed this out, and I think what I did was I kind of, poked the bear a little bit, and the pushback was, "Oh, we'll never be able to regulate this, so I'm not even interested in learning more."
Yeah, that's pretty much ostrich head in the sand
It
mindset.
is. It is.
It's absurd, and it's true. I mean, you're definitely you're touching on a really important point about the disparities amongst the different demographics
Mhm.
in this country and around the globe, and what they're faced with as far as health outcomes, their housing conditions. I mean, all this stuff is just
Right.
really. We did a big feature article on it in the magazine about
Mm.
a little over a year ago, and it's just alarming. It's really the people that are the most underserved seem to be the ones that have, just the worst access to everything, and
Right,
they'd have no resources to change it.
and I have nothing against organizations like Habitat because I think they do incredible things, uh, but when you get habitat homes being built out of materials that have been donated by distributors and suppliers and manufacturers, a lot of times these aren't the healthiest materials that they make. They're
Yeah, they're
probably
not
the
given their best necessarily.
correct,
you know.
correct. And so again,
Yeah.
I feel guilty being involved in projects like that where I know that people are being moved into unhealthy homes. Now, if you look at it from a standpoint of public health, a lot of these materials that are being regulated, lead, mold, water issues, so forth, there's money in it right now. There are funds available from municipalities and from the
Hmm.
federal government to assist in either the avoidance of those things or the removal of those.
Hmm.
But when it comes to something like formaldehyde, which is the one chemical that I focus on almost exclusively when it comes to indoor air quality because it's found in so many things and it's
Hmm.
so dangerous. Formaldehyde is completely forgotten about. And, I find it when I do testing of homes, I find it in carpeting, I find it in wood flooring, I find it in cabinetry, paints, you name it. But again, there's no federal funding available to assist in the removal of this. Matter of fact, there is no push on a grand scale to remove that out of the building industry because it's used so much.
Yeah, and even there's not even really a great consensus on what levels are acceptable, right?
Mhm.
You've got California's CARB standards are more stringent than the rest of
Sure.
the country. EPA attempted to push through a more stringent standard that by EU standards would still be considered pretty lax,
Right. Oh, yeah.
and the pushback is just horrific, trying to,
It is
to
horrific.
stop them from implementing these things.
Yeah, at one time, this is probably about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago at a USGBC conference, I heard some speaker talking about how we import well over 2 to 4 million sheets of plywood, formaldehyde, urea formaldehyde based plywood from China every year. China does not allow the use of those products in their own governmental buildings.
That's
Uh,
fascinating.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Well,
Yep.
I mean, for years, we were exporting asbestos too.
Exactly.
But we still import
Exactly
it
right.
too, which is special.
Right. Yeah,
That's
still
it.
being
We
mined
can
up in
get into that
Canada.
whole thing, the legacy asbestos that everybody seems to think has been resolved. And I think the real estimates now are. We had a guest on a few weeks back that I think the actual estimates are less than 20% of the legacy asbestos is even gone, and we're still bringing asbestos-laden products into the United States
Yes,
every
we
day.
are. Well, again, if you look at that list, I mentioned this before, 92,000 chemicals roughly that are available for use in building materials and home
Mhm.
goods. Out of that list, we know about 3%. We know the toxicological effects of about 3%. We have no idea what the other 97% of those chemicals do to the
Mhm.
human body. The other thing is, in the history of the chemical approval process, how many chemicals have actually been taken off the market? It's like less than 10.
Yeah, there's not many. I mean, not much activity has been, on that whole list that
Mhm,
EPA, apparently has the purview to regulate,
mhm.
asbestos being on that list as well. Yeah,
Right,
there's very few of those components. That
exactly.
I think it's a lot less than 10. I think it's like 5 or 6. I
Right.
think is what the
Well,
number is.
I think like several of them are actually derivatives one another, but yeah,
Right.
you're right. I mean, it's a very small list, and formaldehyde, we all know it's a carcinogen.
Sure. Yeah.
Why are we allowed to still use it? Why is it found? I did testing of vape cartridges and found that vape smoke contains toxic levels of formaldehyde, but we're allowed to use them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, welcome to the way things are done. I mean, we could go
Yeah.
across the line and start talking about, personal care products.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's like we did articles on that and coverage on that where you talk about the Wild West, that stuff is just all voluntary regulated. It's regulated
Yes.
by the industry itself, which means that there's tons of carcinogens in lipsticks and
Oh yeah.
lotions and all the body care products you use, body
Right.
washes and all that stuff. This stuff's full of garbage.
It is. The environmental working group was doing a good job of actually starting to list some of the good ones and some of the bad ones and so forth. But even with that, we've looked at a lot of the personal care products that they have listed as being safe, and some of them actually do off gas, and they do off gas formaldehyde, and that's because I think they look at it from an ingredient list first, right? Um,
Right. As opposed to how they actually interact when
exactly,
they're being used.
exactly right.
And then how they're actually being used because people don't necessarily follow the labels on anything, cleaning products, whatever, so it's like
Right. Well,
what is the
well,
actual
yeah.
real
If
world
one coat is
usage,
great, 3 coats must be better.
you know?
You know.
It's crazy. We have another question. I think
All
it's
right.
changing our thought a little bit here. But Shannon's asking: Are mold tests by many of the mold remediation companies accurate? And is there a best way to test for mold? I want to hear your opinion on it. I've got a whole buttload of opinions on this
Oh,
one.
I'm sure you do. And let me give you my opinion based upon what I've seen over the last several years. Um, I believe that no one test is the best way. I think you need to do, especially if you start finding mold in a certain test. I would do multiples. I'm a big believer in the more information we have, the better we have to use this information and be able to come up with a way to move forward. I've worked with clients who have done prism tests, the home air check product. I have worked with ERMI tests and HERTSME tests and so on and so forth. It really kind of comes down to what you see, what you don't see, If you have visible mold growth, and it's not just, simple mildew that can be wiped off, but it's actually in a surface, that's where I think ERMI testing is very, very crucial. If you don't have any visible growth, but you did a mold test anyway, and you find a large amount of mold, a very high number, now you're looking at doing some investigative work, and that's going to require some hands-on, opening up some walls and looking in the ductwork.
So I mean, so I'd argue, first of all, the ERMI's, well, ERMI, I guess, is a test. It's a protocol that was developed by EPA, that, in my opinion, has been like the scale. The ERMI scale has been misused, as have
Mm,
some of the other derivatives of that scale. I
okay.
mean, it's based on a qPCR analysis, which is a
Mhm.
piece, and everybody's familiar with PCR now since the pandemic.
Mhm.
So it's a DNA based
Right.
analysis, which is very accurate. If you have a reference point, it's
Right.
super accurate. So PCR analysis is a good protocol. The premise behind what was done in the ERMI is taking more of a conglomerate type test, taking it like a dust sample and
Right.
analyzing overall for historical what's going on in the property. Which I think I think there's a lot of value in that if you're doing the first snapshot to see what's the historical content
Correct.
of the settled particles that are in the space. Okay, great.
Mhm.
The problem in my mind is that ERMI scale is wrong. I mean,
Mm.
I will flat out say that those numbers don't make a lot of sense, to me as a
Mhm.
professional, having used technology and sampling. But I will also pick on almost everything. If you're taking air samples in a space for mold, it's a snapshot test. Typically, you do it in
Exactly.
spore traps, it's 5 minutes. Even a
Yep.
culture, like a single stage bioimpactor with a petri dish, that's still a
Mhm.
3-minute sample.
Right.
And it's only collecting a couple cubic feet of air in a very small
Mhm.
area, and then
Right.
people extrapolate that to mean like 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, a larger area than it's actually sampling. And even the analysis is subjective. So where I'm going is, and this, I guess, back to our question here, Shannon, I, there's no great methodology out there
Mhm.
that's like a fail-safe thing you can just use. What
Correct.
you have to have professional, somebody has to understand what this stuff means,
Right.
and it's more than just a test, right? I mean, I guess you start with a test maybe, but somebody has to interpret what's going on, and you're looking for more thing, right? I mean, you would agree with this, right, Andy, as far as
100%.
moisture issues in the building. If there's
Oh, yeah.
mold is a symptom, it's not the problem. The problem is a moisture
Correct.
problem.
Correct.
So
Correct. And so this is why I say that the more information we have, the better. The person, who's actually conducting the tests, this is where, um, can make or break whether those results are even worth it or not, right? Uh, the
totally.
if you look at a scale, like a 24-hour scale, if there was a way, and there are ways that you can actually measure your air for pollutants continuously for a 24-hour scale, you're going to find that during the day, that number goes vastly up and vastly down. And then it kind of comes back again because it's going to change based upon temperature, humidity, air
Yeah,
movement,
it's
who's
totally
going in and
dynamic.
out of the
It's totally
house.
dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So I
that's the
think
problem.
you
You take
get
a snapshot, you're looking at one slice of that, and
exactly
so I guess my takeaway, especially with air sampling, is
right.
that if you have a high level that you detect in an air sample, it's probably there. Except for the extreme case where the sampler is either unethical and skewed it intentionally,
Right.
or they really cross contaminated somehow. But for the most part, you don't get false positives. What you do get is undercounts in air samples all the
Yes.
time,
Right.
and misses. You miss.
I agree. I
Yeah, so
agree.
that's
And
it's a
so
problem.
let me
Uh,
just I'm trying to make my camera be a little less fuzzy for some reason. There we
oh, because
go.
you're in autofocus. Here we go.
Nice.
So Pat's this. Oh, Pat. Hey, Pat. Pat's up in Alaska, so it's like 6 hours earlier there,
Hmm.
or 5 hours. So he's saying
Good
for mold
morning.
sampling, using labs that analyze 100% of the sample is key. And using labs that read 25 or 30% and multiply it out is wrong. And he's talking
Mhm.
about spore traps because there's a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of laboratories that do a partial trace of the
Yeah.
spore trap analysis.
Mhm.
So as subjective as the spore trap is, and this is one of the things I always teach in my classes too. I mean, you're taking this 2 cubic feet of air, 2.5 cubic feet of air for 5 minutes in one little spot, and
Right.
and you take a couple of them in a building, and you think you know the building.
Mhm.
Somebody's reading it on a tick sheet, and they're coming out with their under a microscope. They're counting things. So you can get that wrong.
Yep.
It comes back to the consultant. The consultant sees the report, but they only looked at 25% of the stuff that was skewed to begin with. It's like,
I know.
I
I
agree. Yeah.
know. It's yeah, this is a problem. I think everybody's trying to save time and save money and come up with quick and easy answers. And unfortunately, it's a lot of times, most times, there's not a quick and easy answer to move forward on this.
Totally agreed. So we talked a lot about building materials, but we're running out of time. We need more. We need another show, first of all, Andy,
Yes.
because this is going way too quick. I'm looking at the clock, going, there's so many points I want to cover. So we talked about materials. We talked a little bit about products, as far as
Right.
some of, I mean, obviously, you're predominantly your focus and your consultancy and the stuff that you do with your organization
Mm.
is dealing with new construction, right? So that's what you're doing with the Green
I
Design
would say
Center.
for the most part, yes. Now that's also cyclical. I think that as mortgage rates go up and um, cost and availability is becoming a problem, I'll start to do more remodeling projects. But to me, it's all it's I treat things very similarly between remodeling and new construction. The bigger issue with remodeling, though, especially if somebody's living in the home while it's being done, is we really need to be concerned about every aspect of the process. In new construction, there are things that we can kind of not worry about as much because there's nobody living there at the time. But in remodeling, we really need to be careful. So yes, and I would say this, that I focus on toxicity of materials. Um, yes, every client now is concerned about mold, concerned about energy efficiency, and so forth. But for me, I really focus on the toxicity of the building materials used and how that impacts the human occupants. 90% of the toxic off gassing or the dangerous off gassing that you'll face inside of a built structure once you move in will come from the things you see and touch on a daily basis. That would be things like your flooring materials, your wall finishes, your cabinetry and millwork, and then your own personal furnishings and furniture, window treatments, artwork, clothing, things like that. The last 10% of any chemical off gassing to worry about in the home will come from things behind the walls, above the ceiling that we will never see.
From the
And so it's
interstitial
not as
spaces. Yeah.
yeah, so it's not as much of a concern, but we need to really take some time on it at the outset because you have one shot at it.
Mhm.
You know,
And that's really that's part of your whole, design of how you do that. I know the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, has and I'm going to botch it because I can't remember the acronym for it, but it's basically a research house that simulates a four-family living in a just a small house with a garage
mhm,
on their campus in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and we spent a lot of time there. So it was predominantly for energy research. It was the energy research lab, but they started doing a lot of indoor air quality stuff. So they have all this robotic stuff and automated things that simulate activities. So there's no
mhm,
people there, but they got heaters that heat up in rooms, lights turn on, showers start, washing machine
mhm,
runs. All this stuff's all automated from the control center.
right.
But they started looking at what's happening with the building components in the wall detail, like to your
Mm,
point of the interstitial stuff, which really has not been analyzed that much.
no,
Those things are analyzed by themselves in test chambers,
right.
and that's how the research is done, but not in a real application where it's in a wall detail and the sun's
Mhm,
beating on it for 2 years or 4 years, and what's
right.
happening now, what's getting into the occupant space. And they're
Exactly
they're
right.
doing some remarkable research on that there at NIST.
Well, and that's wonderful because we need more. We need more information. Again, the more information we have, the better conclusions we can come to. Science is never settled, and
Hmm.
no matter what you want to hear about, climate change issues and so forth, science should never be settled. We should always be questioning it. Let's come up with better ideas.
Right.
Let's come up with a better way to do things, and most importantly, let's actually come out with ideas that are friendlier to the human occupants of these buildings.
Yeah, but that's an interesting concept. You talked a little bit, about i- the introducing, like how do you know when I guess coming up with what the right parameters are for a given client. Like one
Right.
size doesn't fit all, right?
Right,
So,
right.
healthy or green or whatever
Mhm.
terminologies you're talking about,
Right.
every client has a specific set of parameters that
Right.
they're hoping to achieve, right? So,
That's
and
right.
that in the pre-show we discussed a little, and I think we touched on it here, but I really want to get step back into that a little bit
Sure.
because you seem to have a unique approach to that you don't do a one size fit all approach.
I don't. I learned years ago that you can't. I got started in this business so long ago, like I said before, that when green was just a simple color. But let me explain it this way. Any given day in my showroom, I'll have three different types of customers come in and ask for help. The first customer comes in and says, "We are building a new home. We've got a 7-year-old with autism, and she cannot be around any um, chemical off gassing because it seems to exacerbate her symptoms, and it does. So we need help in picking out materials that are free of chemical off gassing." So that's customer number one. Customer number two walks in and says, and this happened to me several years ago. "I've been on this earth for 55 years. I've been a burden to the earth for 55 years. I want to buy an existing home, completely remodel it using recycled and repurposed materials. I want to go to Habitat Restore and get my cabinets and my countertops and so forth. Can you help me?" Third customer walks in and says, "I want to build the home with the lowest carbon footprint." Now, out of those customers, which one's right? Which one's wrong? Of course, they're all right in their own way. They
Hmm.
all have, first of all, a different view of what green means to
Hmm.
them. This is why the term green has to be defined.
Sure.
So I define it as, what is your degree of green? First customer's degree of green is human health. The second customer's degree of green is sustainability. The third customer's degree of green is environment.
Hmm.
Now, even focus even further now on the human health aspect, which is where I come from. What affects them the most? The first question I ask to a customer who wants to build a healthy home is, are there any known health issues amongst any of the people living in the home? Oh, sure. Well, my son has mast cell activation syndrome, or, all of us got poisoned by mold in our last house, or somebody has dysautonomia. I mean, so I look at that, and it helps me create now a mental checklist of what we need to do during the design development phase of this home. And this is where the industry just doesn't know what to do. Again, they look at everything at one broad brush and, let's just make it green. Well, I say, let's look at some of the finite issues we have to deal with. We have issues with mercury and concrete because of the fly ash that's used. So if somebody already has a heavy metal poisoning, we need to avoid fly ash. If somebody has again, mold sensitivity, or has been poisoned by mold because of a previous home, I'm looking at the design of the home and saying, we got to change things up here, because as much as we try to eliminate air infiltration, it's going to happen
Sure.
because somebody along the way
Mhm.
will just make an honest mistake at a flashing point, or
Sure.
somewhere in a
Or just
penetration.
virtue of the fact, just movement in the building, just over a
Exactly.
period of time,
It
things fail.
happens.
Everything fails eventually.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
let's try to protect against that proactively, because I don't want you to have a mold problem 4 years down the road.
Hmm.
And so we look at things again like that. We're really trying to focus on exactly what the problems are. And if somebody says, "We have no health issues right now, but we'd like to keep it that way."
Sure.
All right, so now I'm going to be giving the pros and cons of every step until we come up with a almost a specification, like we would do in commercial construction,
Hmm.
of how this home needs to be put together.
I mean, I'd argue that all these parameters are important and they all should be considered. And then, like, I guess what you're suggesting is that you look at it and then you prioritize, because
You have to
there's
prioritize
you
because
have a finite amount of resources and money
bingo,
to build. Like you can't,
bingo.
like, in a perfect world you do everything and you do it absolutely perfect. But okay, that's we don't all have those resources. We don't. We
At
can't all
the
build rockets to fly up to space and stuff. It's like we
yeah,
don't.
as much as everybody says to me, "I wanna build the perfect home," it's not possible. You
No,
will drive yourself to the poorhouse or
no.
the nut house before either of those happen any of this happens.
It's
So,
but you can build a much better home than you probably would have built if you didn't consider these things,
well,
without a question.
that's
Without
of
that much
course,
more money too.
without a question, Bob.
Yeah.
I think the difference is, though, so many clients come to me now with, unrealistic expectations of what can be done, or unreal expectations of what they think that they're going to get if they don't ask these questions. There's a middle ground there, and I think that the building industry is getting better. It is starting to clean itself up somewhat, but on the other hand, there's a lot of areas that they're just completely avoiding because it's just easier to avoid it than to have the conversation. And so that's what I try to do, is bring these points up to the point where we've now argued both sides of it. I can argue for it and argue against it. What have you decided now that we have made an educated decision on this? What's the best way moving forward? And does it fit within the budget? And does it fit within the aesthetic?
I mean, I can argue that even today, 2022, you still see new construction, especially in the residential, home market, where
Mhm.
flashings are improperly installed.
Oh,
Like
yes.
windows aren't properly flashed; they're sealed at the bottom. They tape the bottom. It's like just concepts that they should have gotten, 50 years ago, but at the very least, they should have gotten at least 10, 15 years ago. And
True.
and you see like. As a consultant going out in in buildings, and what's the number one failure point that ends up leading to mold issues? Most of the times, if it's not a catastrophic water event,
Right.
it's failed flashings.
Yeah.
That's almost, around windows or doorways or
Exactly
roof
right.
flashings or something. That's how the water's getting into the building detail, into the building envelope usually.
Exactly
A-
right.
and these are things that shouldn't be failing because they're failed just through sheer negligence.
Yeah,
We have
I think
technology that can do it right.
I think it's negligence, but it's also arrogance. It's arrogance
Ah,
by
okay.
the industry, professionals, these contractors who have said, "I've been doing this for 30 years. I know what I'm doing." Like I said to you before, I've
Yeah.
been golfing for that long, and I still stink.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just
Right.
because
Right.
you do something doesn't make you an expert.
Yeah, you have to do something well to become an expert.
Right. And
Yeah,
for
yeah,
me, I learn something new from my customers every single day. I have to learn in order to evolve. And I think this is where the industry gets themselves into trouble, because they think they found the best way to go moving forward, but they're not learning more. They're not
yeah.
eager to learn more.
Well, it's because think about it. In the home construction, the margins are very low,
Yes.
especially in the spec housing. Forget it. There's
Yes.
like they're working on like slivers of profit margins.
Right.
So they're not looking for anything that's going to take away even one iota of bottom line dollar because they don't have much to work with. So I
Yeah,
get
they're not
that. That's part of the
yeah.
problem.
They're not getting paid to learn, they're getting paid to build.
Right.
I understand that completely, and I respect that. I'm a business owner myself, and
Sure.
I don't do this just because I love my customers. I'm trying to, employ people and so forth and keep my business going. I can't preach sustainability if I can't sustain my own business, right? So
Right. Well, I mean, that's that's a true point. We're not working in a vacuum. I mean,
right.
we have to we do have to to meet the daily and monthly bills. But what's interesting in pre-show we talked about, I was involved with a Parade Homes house
Mhm,
that was it was professed they were looking to build green properties. There was in 2009 when NAHB just came out with their new green standard.
mhm,
We were trying to be the first emerald, and oh my goodness, it's like the pushback that I got as the consultant on the project for the GC
mhm.
to deal with these parameters. We literally made the guys that were doing the window flashing. We actually brought in a manufacturer and taught a class there for 4 hours and made them sit there and watch on mock-up models how to actually flash a window. And these
Right.
guys, same thing. Like I've been doing this 30 years. Yeah, you've been doing it wrong for 30 years, dude.
Right.
It's like, because we had them show us first how they do it, and they're taping the bottom of the window, which is just like,
Ugh,
are you kidding me?
my
Like, okay, yeah, so you just trapped all the water into the wall detail to create a mold problem in a year or two.
Yep, yep.
Hello?
Yeah,
But
exactly
just
right.
basic, like 101 stuff.
Sure.
But it was interesting at the end of it, I thought we made some headway because at least with this one builder and his subs, they learned a lot.
Oh, yeah.
They
Oh,
hated
yeah.
me though.
You bring up a short. I know we're running close on time, but a
Yeah, we
short
can we can
story
go a couple
about
minutes over.
a project I was involved with here in Wisconsin many years ago. Is the first model home to be built to the LEED, I think, platinum standard for LEED for homes. It was one of the only model homes built to this standard. I remember the local building association was marketing this, and I was involved in the home very slightly. I just supplied some material, had no input whatsoever in the design of the home. But when the home was open for tours, I was really excited about it because I thought, here, this is great. We finally have an example. And I brought a lot of my friends, a lot of my clients, some professionals. Matter of fact, a really good friend of mine who was a professional interior designer. She also had severe chemical sensitivities. She walked in the house and walked out in 30 seconds, and she said, "I can't be here." Like, what do you mean you can't be here? This is the greenest of the green, at the time,
Right.
homes built. And she goes, "Something in here is causing a headache. I got to get out." Well, after research, after I started doing some testing, I found the so-called environmentally friendly carpet was off-gassing toxic levels of formaldehyde.
Great.
The company who donated the cabinet, closet system used, MDF, and it was full of formaldehyde. And
That's
so,
yeah, totally. It's totally full
again,
of it.
these are things that are forgotten about, in the checklists, right?
Mhm.
Because they meet other requirements, and
Right,
when
and they're
you're
just looking for points. I mean,
they're
when they're
looking for,
doing these
yes, they're
systems,
point
that's the problem
chasing.
with, you put a bicycle rack in, you know?
Oh, yeah. Put a bike rack in, and now you don't
Uh,
have to put
y
in the non-toxic cabinets. You just saved about $250,000
Yeah,
in the condo cost, but, it's unreal.
it's
So
frustrating.
but I learned early on that we cannot rely on checklists and regulations and anything that's put together. There's got to be a reason why. There's got to be a reason why some things are allowed and some things aren't. So I my own checklist is I use a little bit of everything, and then
Mhm.
I throw a little bit of CS into this, which is common sense.
Ah.
Eh,
Oh, that's not common, though.
no, it's not common at all. At
That's kind of a
all.
problem.
It is. And so, I guess that's what makes me and what we do here at Green Design Center unique, is that we really look at things from a standpoint of, I'm a homeowner too, and I've got my own health issues, and I don't want to live in a home that's unhealthy. And I know there are checklists out there and there are regulations and so forth. But if you really worry about living in that home, you got to look at it from a human health holistic standpoint first.
Yeah, and there's so many parameters, it's daunting. We never really touched on the mechanical systems, but
Right.
that's one of the things that I think is blatantly missing in most new construction for residences, especially in the United States,
Totally agree.
is outside air.
Mhm.
Air exchange rates. We here you tend to try to achieve them by having bath fans that run on timers and things like that, which that's to me the lowest possible way you could make air change standards, by drawing air through interstitial spaces in the building. The unplanned pathways,
Exactly.
it's not the way to do it. I mean, yeah, you get air changes, but where's the air coming from? But we should be designing mechanical ventilation, right? In a perfect world, the box is very tight, and then we mechanically control the ventilation
Mhm.
and properly circulate and filter and process the air for humidity and condition. And that's in a perfect world. It's a
Yeah, right.
closed chamber that we control very,
Sure. Well,
uh,
and I know that I know a lot of your followers and listeners and other professionals that, you're involved with may cringe when I say this. This is my own personal opinion. Somebody always asks me, "What's your opinion on a breathable wall system versus a non-breathable wall system?" Uh, what would I rather see? Well, I live in Wisconsin, so what I want to see is, I think it's actually healthier to live in a hermetically sealed box, that but you have to put in, fresh air intake, air exchange systems to bring in air where and when you want it.
mhm,
And to your point, Bob, if you build a home that the wall is, um, not completely airtight, and there are penetrations, and
mhm.
this is where we run into the problems.
Sure,
Air is coming in and bringing with it moisture.
right.
That moisture gets locked in that cavity wall, and now we're in a world of hurt.
Yeah, and
And
really a quarter-inch gap brings in so much moisture. It's crazy when you look at the actual data, how from a building science perspective of what happens.
right.
It's crazy.
So
Little
I
leaks
do
create
think
a lot
that
of
there's
moisture.
there's a either the wall system is fully breathable, as if we're doing something down in South Florida, and it's going to be a block wall system with, that allows for that transmission, or it's got to be something that is completely hermetically sealed,
Mhm,
triple pane, Schuko windows, all that,
mhm.
and then you bring in fresh air when and where you want it.
I actually, I pretty much agree with that philosophy. I
Mhm,
would rather see the box tight
mhm.
and mechanically control the
Right,
parameters,
right,
literally, and really, very smartly, scientifically, have
right.
things, you're monitoring humidity, you're monitoring CO2, you're monitoring everything that's going on in the space, and you have stuff that is smart control systems,
Right.
direct digital
Now,
control stuff that's running.
realistically
But
realistically,
costly.
can you do that? Which is why we have to do all these other measures in the
Right.
wall systems. I understand that, but if I had my way, that's how I do it.
Yeah, well, but there's another reason for why that makes more sense because again, we're very US centric with all the stuff we talk about.
Right.
So the thought of outside air makes sense for the most part in the United States. You go to India or other places, outside air is awful.
Mm,
Bringing in outside air will literally make people die. It's
mm.
like the air, there is no clean air outside. So
Right,
they seal buildings up super tight because it makes sense. But we're experiencing wildfires. I mean, that is, elevated
right,
airborne particulates, especially on
right.
the West Coast. There's going to be more of this
Mhm.
where and that comes across the whole country. So
Sure.
these sometimes the outside air is not that good. So that's why again, I think you're talking about controlling the ventilation parameters and actually controlling the quality of the if you're using
For
outside
sure,
air, having filtration and
for sure.
and whatever is necessary, maybe even carbon filtration in
Oh,
really
yeah.
bad areas where
Yeah,
you're
I
actually cleaning the
recommend
air.
carbon on every project I do.
Mhm. Yeah, makes sense. Makes
Mhm.
sense. Wow. Well, we did run out of time. And I we have to have you back because I have a whole list of points here that we didn't
Nice.
get to. It's very
Very
frustrating.
good.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. Great conversation. I just float up. So, again, for those of you who've been watching, it's Andrew Pace. He's the founder of the Green Design Center, and you can find out more about them at thegreendesigncenter.com. I know we had some questions here up in the chat that we didn't get to. I apologize, everybody, because, well, we got 60-ish minutes. We were taking a couple extra, but we will. We'll take some of those questions that were there and post them in the comments on the Healthy Indoors Global Community after, and hopefully Andy can get in there, maybe take a look at it and comment back.
No
We
problem.
definitely want to have you on again, though. That's
Oh, I
that's for
look
sure.
forward
This is
to it.
what a great conversation. Fabulous. So now it's time to do all that wonderful promotional stuff. So many of you are watching the show today on the Healthy Indoors Online Global Community, and that's great. But if you're not watching it on there, you should be, and that's at global.healthyindoors.com. It is a centric platform that allows you to get content like this, free content that's open to the world, but even more so than just the content. This is a place where we stream shows and we do everything else, but it's a place where you can actually communicate, and it's a lot like a social media platform. We have it's just a great place, and we're really encouraging you to take a look at that and dip your toes in the water there. It's quite a unique platform because it is the only one that we know of that's actually completely centric to the indoor environmental issue. We have the August edition of Healthy Indoors magazines out soon. I know Susan Valenti, our publisher, is somewhere online here, and she'll probably chime in and chat and tell us when it's coming out, but it's coming out soon. So keep your eyes open for the August edition. But hey, you know what? You don't just have to go to the August edition. We have all the editions. In fact, this is our birthday. Today's the 4th. And we actually founded or launched Healthy Indoors magazine on August 6th, 2013. So we're experiencing, ready for this, our ninth birthday. It's crazy. We've been here forever. So if you go to healthyindoors.com, that's where all the back issues of the magazine are. You can access all that and read all the issues, look at all our great content. It's all free to the world. So we'd love to have you participate and join us there. So we'll be back again next week, same bat time, same bat channel, um, for the Healthy Indoors live show. Again, I want to thank our guest Andy Pace. Great conversation. We're going to be hearing more from this gentleman. I know, it's like, and real important topics, Andy. So looking forward to
Well,
seeing you soon.
thank you. I really appreciate speaking to your audience and making everybody aware. I'm sure they already are, but I like to point these things out. So I really appreciate it.
Excellent. All right. Well, without further ado, we'll see y'all next week on the Healthy Indoors live show. Until then, I'm Bob Krell. Stay healthy and safe.